person is not just a pessimist. You wouldn't look at someone who's just like generally optimistic and happy about their day and say, look, why you got like that guy that he's got a smile on his face? Like, why are you so delusional right now? Why are you so happy? Like, you want to just call someone who's like generally in a giddy or jolly mood delusional because their words mean different things. We've been talking about the info slide a lot, and I thought it'd be a good idea to write it down in correct time. So let's actually read from said info slide and get us some more clarity on the matter. It says, delulu solulu is a slang phrase primarily used by Gen Z in online communities that means delusional thinking is the solution. It's a playful way of saying that having a positive, optimistic, and even unrealistic outcome can help you achieve your goals or cope with challenges. So what do we actually have to see? It's not just being optimistic and positive, it's also having that component of unrealisticness. So when they characterize it to you as, look, opposition is characterizing like you're just a madman sitting on one thing and you're like hell-bent on achieving it no matter what. That's not, first of all, it's not what we're characterizing, I'll bring it later, but the point is that there is an element of unrealism. Before I get to the clash, let's all do this.
We characterize in our first speech that the opposite of unrealistic is realistic. If the average person has an unrealistic chance to get into Harvard, but our delulu finds and seeks to get into Harvard even if it is unrealistic.
Okay, if I submit an SAT with a 900 score and no extracurriculars, no volunteer work, absolutely nothing going for me, and I submit it to Harvard just because why not, that would be delusional. However, it is not delusional if I submit a perfect score SAT, tons of extracurriculars, tons of interesting things about me. That is not delusional if I submit it to Harvard. Why? Because I've increased the chances to the point where it's no longer delusional. Here's the key separator in this debate. And actually, before I get that, you expect three clashes from the speech. Clarifying what delusion is, then clarifying how it leads to social change, and then clarifying how it leads to personal change. Those are the three clashes. Let's start with the first, what delusion is. Ultimately, proposition has said three things about delusion in the speech. Two of them contradict each other, and that's why the interpretation is right. They first tell you that a delusional person, where there's a slight chance they'll pursue it, right? If they have a small chance of getting Harvard, they're going to pursue it anyway because they believe that they can get that goal. Then they tell you that failure does not affect the delusional person, and they're going to continue no matter what. They're going to continue down the road, they're not going to let failure stop them. But then they tell you, and this is in response to our examples, they say that they're willing to fail and that they can change from their course. That a delusional person is willing to change. They use this in the relationship example, if you remember. They said that the delusional person is actually the one who's finally breaking up and changing after failure. But the thing is that those two contradict each other. Either what they're saying is true that failure just doesn't affect them and they're going to continue no matter what, or it's true what they're saying is that they're willing to fail and that they can change. So either they're not going to change course because of failure or they will. Take your point.
How do you posit your outlook? And maybe being a bit unrealistic doesn't mean that like
So what we have to see with what the delusion term means is that it is unrealistic. That we're on opposition for a reason. We're not trying to say that it's actually a good thing. We're saying delusion is a bad thing. That is why it's characterized this way in the info slide, and that's why we're characterizing it this way as well. That delusion has an aspect of idolizing the outcome. Here's a good way to put it, right? Let's say you need like the adequate tools to do something, right? If I want to get a Harvard, I need those like boxes to take in order to have realistic shots. If I just submit it anyway with inadequate tools to achieve my goal, that is delusion. If you are doing something knowing that you are incapable right now or have inadequate things at lower percentages, we have these percentages in debate, if you have a lower shot and you do it anyway without taking steps to increase the percentage, that is when it's delusion. It's no longer delusion when you take the hard-working steps to increase the percentage. Because at that point, it becomes realism. And it's not realism, it's not delusion.
Could please the speaker say to us where in the info slide it said that delusion means a maniacal following of one certain goal, and could the panel then notice how it was nowhere to be seen?
So if you have an unrealistic outlook on things, which is what the info slide said, that means you are denying reality to an extent. That it is, okay, it's realistic for me to say I'm going to get into a school if I have a perfect SAT score. It is unrealistic to say if I have missing 700 points off the test. Right? Okay, if I study for a test, it's not delusional. You wouldn't call me delusional if I studied really hard for a test and said, hey, I'm really optimistic about this test. I'm ready to win this. I studied for a bunch more, I'm super well prepared. I would not be delusional if I had a positive outlook about that test. Because I put in the steps to increase my odds of success to the point where it's a realistic expectation. It is delusional for me to say, oh, I read my textbook one time, but I still think I'm going to get a perfect score, right? That's when it's delusional. When you have the inadequate steps, the inadequate tools, the inadequate measures, percentage without taking steps to up it and change it. This is the most reasonable interpretation,
You're right.
because if that's not the interpretation, then the debate becomes about hard work versus laziness, right? Because they say pessimistic, you're not going to do anything. If you're delusional, that means you're going to accomplish more things. I'll get to you in 1 second. Just yeah, go ahead.
The main mechanism of the proposition side is that the person will less fail to get into Harvard, but he will be more likely to look past the stress and work with himself to see the mistakes that he made and actually improve himself to the next time he could get into Harvard.
So, if I could actually ask a question about this, so would you say that the delusion is getting into Harvard, right? That's the end goal you're pursuing.
The delusion is the mindset that I am going to try anyway because I'm not so afraid of negative impacts that come with rejection.
So the end goal is getting into Harvard, and you're basically saying that, even if you fail, you're going to look past that and get to something else. That means that you abandon that goal and change to something else. That's no longer delusion. Because what you're acknowledging is that, okay, you spent it, you failed, you're going to go do something else. That means you're no longer delusional about getting into Harvard. That means you're no longer idolizing that end outcome. That means that you're literally diverting from the whole course. This doesn't make sense. They provide no mechanization as to why a delusional person would actually change, because then you divert from the whole reason you're delusional in the first place. So let's get into the second main flash of why it's actually going to lead to social change if you're not delusional. Because here's what they essentially said. They said, like if you have a civil rights movement or an LGBT movement or something like that, it's delusional for them to keep protesting and keep pursuing rights, right? Here's what would be delusional. If I went to like my local Walmart and handed out petitions saying, can you please sign the petition? That way we could get more rights or something like that. That would be delusional because that is no realistic shot of success. It's not delusional, again, if you work to increase your chance of success. If you start doing things that are more likely to get you the desired outcome, that's not delusion anymore. So when they tell you that all these social changes are an aspect of delusion, it's not. It's an aspect of hard work to increase the odds of success to the point where it actually succeeded. It would be delusional if they just started handing out petitions and then expected rights to come from simply putting up posters and flyers or something like that. Finally, I want to discuss personal change, though, because this is, I feel like, where the most example clashes at least occur, right? Especially an example like the toxic relationship. And they tell you that a delusional person is the one who actually would break up because they're going to learn from failure. No, the delusional person is the one who idolizes the idea of being in a relationship and is unwilling to change. That's why change and delusion are inherently incompatible, because that end goal, that end desire, is delusional. Let me ask you this: would you personally call that situation, the person staying in a toxic relationship, would you call them delusional? I think that is the word that pops to mind when you look at that for a reason, because the delusional person is the person who is unwilling to change. The realistic person, the flexible person, is the one who is willing to change, and that's why I am proud to